Our next talk will be by Dr. Celia Witten, who is Deputy Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the FDA, and the talk will be on FDA efforts to advance product development for rare diseases.
Sorry. Thank you, and thanks for this invitation to come speak. And also, I'm glad to see so many people are still here at this time. There have been some really great talks today, and I think a lot of what I'm going to say will reflect or echo some of what's been said. So I'm going to talk about rare disease in general, and then I'm going to talk about gene therapy in specific at the end of my talk. So I just want to mention, I'm from the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. I'm not going to read this page. It's a list of our products, which includes gene therapies, and a number of the other types of things are in the Center for Drugs. So here are some of the types of therapeutics that we see aimed at rare diseases, and I think a number of them have been mentioned today during the various talks, specifically for CMT. So I'm going to focus specifically on clinical development challenges and some of the programs we have that might help developers, and I think would be of interest to the community at large, since developing these products is really a team effort that includes everybody. So small numbers of patients, heterogeneous course of disease, the fact that some of these diseases, especially CMT, are slowly progressive. There may be a dearth of endpoints, and natural history information may be limited. I think I'm echoing the comments everybody else has made during the course of this meeting. So I'm not going to dwell on those. I want to talk about what are some of the regulatory tools, approaches, or meeting support that FDA has or is developing to try to help advance these products into further clinical development or into approved products. So first, I'll just mention platform technologies. So we have in our legislation a requirement to develop guidance on platform technologies and explain how sponsors can reference or rely upon data information from a previous application that incorporates or uses the same platform technology. So I just want to mention, I think this is really important. The term platform is used, I think, more broadly and has been used more broadly at this meeting. And some of those more broad uses are also extremely important. But this could apply, I mean, some of, like what was mentioned earlier today, the need for delivery methods or delivery tools. One could envision a delivery tool being used successfully in one application, and that tool and its data being used in another one. So this could be used for some of the types of discussions that have been had today. But anyway, I think this is useful. We have a draft guidance issued, and we'll be issuing a final guidance. So endpoints and study design, that's been the topic of a lot of the discussion at this session. So where are we? First I'll say I think that this product has been mentioned in at least 3 other talks, Zolgensma, and I think that's because it's so exciting. This product is for SMA type 1. And for this product, the clinical results were so striking. They were, even though there wasn't a control, and I think it was clear that the results seen in this trial from these patients were not results that are seen in nature. And I won't, it's already been described earlier today, I won't belabor it, but this, for example, this child is still running around at age 3 at a time when, the life expectancy is 2 years old. So we have a number of expedited development programs. But I was going to say, not every time. I mean, if you're fortunate enough to hit a home run like that in a disease of that nature where you can show a benefit pretty early, then there's not really the need for a lot of concern about, finding a new endpoint or what are we going to use? Can we use a surrogate? But for a lot of these development programs, that won't be the case. So we do have a number of expedited development programs, and I know the one that people are really focused on is accelerated approval, so I'll just talk about that for a minute. And these are, like I say, can be applicable to drugs or biologics for serious conditions. So the criteria for accelerated approval were already described by another speaker: serious or life-threatening disease or condition, and the substantial evidence effectiveness can be based on a surrogate considered to be reasonably likely to predict clinical benefit, or an intermediate clinical endpoint that's reasonably likely to predict an effect on irreversible morbidity or mortality or other clinical benefit. And we have to take into account severity, prevalence of the condition, and the availability of alternative treatments. So I just want to make a couple comments here. We are asked all the time, serious or life-threatening disease or condition. You know, our disease, or at least some of the manifestations, aren't life-threatening, but they certainly affect people's lives in what they would consider a serious way. And I mean, that's something that if I were proposing accelerated approval, I would just make that case and explain why it was serious and what the impact was on people's lives that was serious. I'll just mention what the intermediate clinical endpoint is, an example, because people don't know what that means. An example of that would be like if you look at okay, I can't think of an example offhand, sorry. But anyway, we're talking about surrogates. I think that's more likely to apply here than clinical endpoints earlier in the disease. And so I think surrogate endpoint is what you want to focus on for this. As one of the speakers said earlier, you can have a surrogate endpoint that is been demonstrated or accepted to predict irreversible morbidity or mortality, and that would be a straight approval. That wouldn't be accelerated approval. But one thing I want to mention is that all of these need to have confirmatory trials. If it's under accelerated approval, and the post-marketing trial is to verify and describe the clinical benefit when using accelerated approval. So we do have the ability to require that those trials have to be underway at the time of approval. And what underway means is something that could be discussed specifically with the sponsor. But that's important because one of the things that happened with the accelerated approval program, which has made FDA a little bit risk-averse towards using it, I think, is that not all the trials were always completed. So we want to make sure that if we do approve something under accelerated approval, we will get the answer because we need to know and patients need to know. And one last comment about the last bullet. Accelerated approval inherently has more uncertainty than, let's say, you did a clinical trial and you were looking for clinical benefit. I mean, even there's obviously you can get a result and you could do a later study that shows something else. But for accelerated approval, it's more of a risk because we don't really know what the endpoint is going to predict. I don't think, so we can expect that some of these post-marketing studies may show that the product doesn't work. I think we all have to be comfortable with the idea that that's not a failure of the accelerated approval program. That's just a feature of it, that you've got more uncertainty and some of the products will not live up to their proposed benefit. Okay, additional meeting support. So I don't think that just saying that accelerated approval exists and endpoints are important, none of us think that that's enough. These are very hard questions and require a lot more discussion. We do have a couple of regulatory meetings that are specifically related to study design or endpoints, and the first one is the Rare Disease Endpoint Advancement Program. This one is one where quarterly a sponsor can apply to, or doesn't have to be a sponsor, but mostly it generally is, can apply to propose an endpoint and ask for, and what they get, the benefit of that is a couple of extra discussions with FDA just focused on the endpoint. And because it's a program for which we're hoping to learn ourselves, help that sponsor, but also help the community learn. A version of that discussion, when it's completed, will be published on the web. So that has to be agreed to by the sponsor in advance. Then type C meetings, a sponsor with it can be before their program, but I would say it's probably most useful if they have an ongoing program, can ask for a meeting specifically to discuss a surrogate endpoint. It's a new surrogate endpoint they'd like to use. So that would be an extra meeting with FDA. Oops. And then the Complex Innovative Design Meeting Program, that's similar to that one has been going on for longer, similar to the Rare Disease Endpoint Advancement Program. Sponsors can apply to be part of this, have a couple of extra meetings about their innovative design, and then those are published as a summary on the web, and those are worth looking at. I think they're, even now, I have the link here, and some of them, I don't know to what extent they're relevant or not. They're not about endpoints, but for example, there's one about epilepsy, a family of epilepsies, which can be from a family of genes. And the complex innovative design proposed was a type of trial that looked at the different mutations separately, but looked at the possibility of aggregating them to learn something about them as a whole or about each one. So like a Bayesian analysis to support effectiveness from one from looking at the other. And although I really don't know, but I could imagine that this in the future could be useful to some of the CMT developers. Okay, more regulatory support programs. The Interact program, so years ago when I first came to the Center for Biologics, we have what was called a pre-IND program, pre-IND program, which is very popular to talk about specific things like preclinical development. That's typically what people wanted to talk to us very early before they came for the pre-IND, because they didn't want to do animal studies and then have it turn out that they'd come to us and we'd say, no, you did the wrong animals, the wrong number, the wrong endpoints, or didn't follow them long enough. So this program is a formalization of that, and it's across CBER and CDER. We have the START pilot. This really is a pilot, but if this, I think this is great, actually. I was the acting director of the, this now also is across both centers, but I was the acting director of the office that does gene therapy for when we started this up, and we had a lot of excitement about it. So what this is for selected products to have intensive interactions with the sponsors and see whether that can facilitate the development of those products. Now, it's pretty labor-intensive, time-intensive for FDA. It's a pilot. CDER is doing this also. We only announced this once, and the products have been selected. But if this becomes an actual program, that we can continue, then it would be worth looking into, especially for these small diseases, small sponsors. I think it's really helpful. Okay, so those slides really related to overall CBER and CDER. I want to just say one more comment, though, which I didn't put a slide on. It just occurred to me when I was listening to all these other discussions. For some things like endpoints, I don't have a slide about this, but there's different ways people can come and talk to us about endpoints, or anything else. It can be developer by developer, or it could be as a group. So you have to think about as a community, do you want to try to, work on your endpoints and each sponsor comes to us? That might be the best thing to do because you're all working on different, sounds like different versions of CMT. Or do you want to sort of as a group try to figure out collaboratively what you might propose? There's different ways to do that too. Okay, I think I'm probably running out of time, so I'll just go through these pretty quickly. So just to say, we have a huge amount of excitement on gene therapies. I mean, the pipeline is growing. The number of approved products is growing. It's just a really just exciting time just to be around, even, from any part of the development world. We are also trying to make some efforts to enhance the global collaborations we already have. So this is one where we're working with EMA, trying to look at applications, BLA applications, and see if we can co-review them. These are just some specific requirements we have under PDUFA 7, which is our user fee legislation. And I mostly put this in just to remind myself to say that there's a couple of guidances and also some meetings that we are required to have, that we're excited about having, that you might want to pay attention to if your work is in the area of gene therapy. I have them listed here. We have an active standards program, and when I'm talking about standards, I'm talking about voluntary consensus standards. There's not a lot of activity. I mean, it's not something that there's a lot of in the gene therapy community, but there is some. And the standards coordinating body, which we helped stand up as part of our legislation that we had a couple of years ago, lists some of the efforts in the cell and gene therapy world. And then this is the last thing, I do want to mention the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium. This is something that it's a collaboration with NCATS, and the Foundation for NIH is supporting development. There's a playbook. So they selected 8 disease areas to try to support with AAV vectors. One of them, I think, is CMT, and there's a playbook that describes interactions. It sort of outlines what the regulatory interactions need to be. It's really quite good. So that's worth looking at. And also, I don't have a slide on this, but I will just mention the Foundation for NIH does do some work in the area of biomarkers. It's all supported by, it's a public-private partnership. But I know that there's one, for example, on neurofilament light chain that that there's some news about, that they submitted it to FDA's Drug Development Tools Program. It's not for Charcot-Marie-Tooth. It's for, I think, frontotemporal dementia. But it's good to be aware of these things. So, and then lastly, in the gene therapy, we have a number of stakeholder engagement opportunities, and some of them are for developers and some of them are for patients, and I have them listed here. So thank you. I think I don't want to outstay my welcome here, but I really appreciate it.